Zanim zaczniemy, mam małą prośbę. Staram się osiągnąć 1000 subskrybentów. To dla mnie bardzo ważna liczba. Proszę, kliknijcie przycisk subskrybuj. To tylko jedno małe kliknięcie, ale dla mnie to ogromna motywacja do dalszego tworzenia filmów. Bardzo dziękuję wszystkim. The line had 14 souls ahead of me, and I counted them because that's what you do when you've been trained to tally exits and personnel and threat vectors in any room you enter. Old habits. Don't just pack up and retire when you do. Keth Station's customs hall smelled like a hospital that had given up halfway through and decided to become a fish market instead. The walls were a pale, washed-out grey. The lighting had the color of a coming headache. The customs officers sat behind scanners that looked expensive enough to make a small Earth township nervous just by existing in their vicinity. I set my bag down between my feet and waited. The aliens ahead of me were dressed the way aliens dress when they want you to know they have money. The Vel delegation wore iridescent wraps that shifted hue with every movement, like oil on water that had visited a very expensive tailor. The Sheth merchants clustered together, emitting soft clicks amongst themselves in that low frequency the translators never bother rendering, because apparently it's nothing you need to know. The 2 Dorn diplomats near the front of the line regarded me with the sort of gaze reserved for something unexpected, something they hadn't yet decided how to categorize. I glanced at the scanner. It was a good one, a Vel-manufactured model judging by the housing. Those things could read the molecular composition of a garment down to the dye lot. I knew because I'd once watched one flag a water filtration membrane as a controlled substance for 45 minutes before a senior officer overrode it. The line shuffled forward. I moved with it. My jacket moved with me. That's the thing about this jacket. It goes where I go. Has for 11 years, with a few interruptions. Earth Defense Corps field issue, 3rd Expeditionary. Standard grey-green, the color of old moss or government buildings, or things meant to last and mostly do. The left shoulder bore a burn scar that no amount of washing had ever fully erased. The left sleeve was about a centimeter shorter than the right because the medic who'd re-stitched it after the reach had been working fast and left-handed, doing her absolute best under the circumstances. And the circumstances hadn't been great. The rank patches were gone. I'd removed them myself 4 years ago, sitting on the edge of a bunk in a transit station, not entirely unlike this one. I kept the jacket. The scanner beeped as I stepped up. The customs officer ran his wand across my bag, then my jacket, then my bag again. Then he paused. His mandibles shifted in a way I'd learned to read as recalibration. He ran the wand over the jacket a second time. His translator unit produced, in flat English, "This garment has been flagged as damaged goods. Declare country of origin." "Earth," I said. The sound in the customs hall shifted. Not silence, more like a pressure adjustment, as if 14 different species were recalibrating their focus and landing squarely on me. The Vel delegates took a small step back. It wasn't rude. It was the kind of careful distance you give something whose category you haven't fully established. The Dorn diplomats exchanged a look that required no translation, because concern is concern across any species. The customs officer looked at his screen. He looked at my jacket. He looked at his screen again. Purpose of visit? Procurement, I said. Water filtration components. He stamped my entry permit with a minimal energy that suggested he'd decided I wasn't interesting enough to detain. As I picked up my bag and walked through the gate, his translator caught the tail end of something he said to his colleague. It rendered it as, "Enjoy your visit, recycled goods." I walked to the berth assignment counter, got my room number, found the corridor, found the door. The berth was precisely the size they always are. One bunk, one shelf, one hook on the wall. The hook was where the jacket went. I hung it there and sat on the edge of the bunk, looking at it for a while. The burn on the shoulder, the re-stitched sleeve, the empty spaces where the patches used to be. There was a 6-hour window before the promenade vendors opened their morning cycle. I set an alarm. I lay down. I didn't sleep for most of it, but that was fine. I was used to waiting. The ceiling of the berth was pale grey and had a small scuff mark near the ventilation unit that looked like it had been made by a boot, which meant someone before me had also found the berth exactly the size it always is. I thought about the filtration components. I had a list. 4 items cross-referenced with 3 different vendors, prices already researched before departure. The township of Crail had pooled 8 months of surplus trade credit to fund this trip. 6,000 people whose water supply was running through a filtration system, held together with replacement parts and sheer determination. They had sent me because I knew how to navigate neutral alien stations without starting anything. That was the job description, informal as it was. Outside the berth, Keth Station hummed. Ships docking, commerce happening, the ordinary machinery of a galaxy that had, over the past 4 years, mostly forgotten Earth existed. I pulled the jacket off the hook and folded it over the end of the bunk where I could see it. The alarm went off. I got up, picked up the jacket, put it on. The sleeve sat slightly askew at the shoulder, the way it always did. I picked up my bag, went to find the filtration components. The promenade on Keth Station was the kind of place that had been built to impress, and it had succeeded. If impressing you means making you feel slightly small and slightly irrelevant while aggressively trying to sell you things, the ceiling was high enough to make the air feel different. The vendor stalls ran in curved rows that followed the station's outer ring, which meant that if you walked in a straight line long enough, you'd eventually end up back where you started, which seemed like a design philosophy with broader applications. I didn't walk in a straight line. I had a list, and I worked through it efficiently. The way you work through procurement when the credit you're spending belongs to 6,000 people who can't afford to have it wasted. The first component was at a Veltec vendor in the 3rd row. Standard filtration membrane housing, Class C. The vendor quoted me a price above the market standard by about 15%. I looked at the display tag. I looked at the vendor. The posted price is different, I said. The vendor, through his translator, said he'd recalculated based on shipping complexity. The item is in your inventory here, in this stall, on the station. There is no shipping, I countered. He recalculated again. The price came down, not all the way, but enough. I paid, took the component, and moved on. The second and third items were at a consolidated parts vendor near the center row. The vendor there didn't bother with a price negotiation. She quoted me 30% above display and watched me with the particular expression of someone who has decided in advance that I won't push back. I pushed back, politely, with documentation I'd prepared before leaving Earth, showing market standard rates across 6 independent trading posts. She matched the posted price. I packed the components in my bag with the careful attention of someone carrying things that matter because they do, and moved toward the outer row to find the 4th item. That's when the teenagers showed up. Chef adolescents travel in groups, which is universal enough to require no explanation. There were 4 of them, maybe 16 in human years, maybe 20. The translator never handles age well across species. They were wearing the kind of clothes teenagers wear when they want to look like they belong somewhere more interesting than where they are. They noticed my jacket. I noticed them noticing it. There's a particular quality to being looked at by strangers who have decided you're funny before you've even opened your mouth. You can feel it. It has a texture to it, like sandpaper applied gently, not hard enough to hurt, just constant enough that you're always aware of it. They started following me at about 20 feet, not threatening, but theatrical. Their translator rendered their conversation in flat English, and what it gave me was, "Earth person, look at the jacket. Is that standard issue for their homeless?" I kept walking. "Does it come with the burns already, or do you add them yourself?" I stopped at a vendor display of polished navigation cores I had no use for, and picked one up, turning it in my hands. It was about the size of a fist, smooth and very cold, and precisely calibrated for ships I would never fly. I held it for a while. The teenagers pulled closer. One of them said something, and the translator gave me old war rag, then dirt world souvenir, then why does it have burns? Did she try to cook in it? Another one, maybe Earth is so poor they cook in their jackets. The vendor of the navigation course watched me holding his merchandise and said nothing. He looked at the teenagers and then at me and made the calculation that this was not his situation to be involved in. I put the navigation core down. I walked to the next stall. The teenagers followed. The promenade was full of other aliens going about their business, and they moved around us the way water moves around a rock, without acknowledging the rock. One Keth family paused at a food vendor, and a child pointed at me. The parent moved the child's hand down without meeting my eyes. I found the vendor who should have had the fourth component. He didn't have it in stock. He directed me to a secondary vendor at the far end of the outer row. I walked there. The teenagers were still behind me. They had gotten closer. They were taking pictures with their personal devices, framing shots of the jacket, comparing images among themselves. Their translator rendered occasional fragments. Should I caption it "War Hero," followed by laughter, followed by caption it "Survivor of the Laundry"? The laugh that followed was the specific laugh of young people performing for each other. I had heard that laugh before, in different species, different stations, different jackets worn by different people who were also just trying to get somewhere and do a thing and go home. I was nearly at the far end of the row when one of them moved in front of me. He was taller than the others, which gave him the confidence that teenagers with recent height gain develop briefly before they learn it means nothing. He stood in my path and held out his device, making a show of photographing the jacket at close range. His translator said, for the benefit of his friends, the species that thought it could reach the stars in a burnt sleeping garment. His friends made a sound of approval behind him. He reached out and took hold of the left sleeve, the re-stitched one. He tugged it lightly, examining the stitching, then looked at his friends and said something the translator gave as, "Did someone do this with their eyes closed?" A pause. I looked at his hand on the sleeve. The medic who had re-stitched that sleeve had been named Carol. She had worked for 9 hours straight after the reach without stopping. Left-handed, fast, precise in all the ways that actually mattered. The stitching was uneven because she'd been running on nothing but focus and stubbornness, and the specific determination of someone who has decided that everyone in front of her is going to make it. She made it. Carol made it. Pete did not. Owen did not. I moved the teenager's hand off my sleeve, the way you move something that has ended up somewhere it shouldn't be, without drama, the way you clear a path. He stepped back. "Okay then," I said. I walked past him, found the secondary vendor, found the fourth component, paid the listed price because the vendor, a quiet older Keth who had probably seen a great many things come through this promenade, quoted me the right price without negotiation and bagged the component without ceremony. I packed it with the others. My bag was heavier now, the good kind of heavy, the kind with purpose in it. I checked my departure time, 4 hours. I found the atrium. I sat down. I ordered something that the station called coffee, and that had coffee shaped the way a photograph has a person's shape, and I pulled out my documentation and started reviewing the return logistics. The promenade noise filtered in from the corridor. Commerce, voices, the click and hum of a station that did not know or care what a third expeditionary jacket meant. I drank the not-quite coffee. It was fine. The atrium was the first place on the station that felt like it had been designed for existing in rather than moving through. High ceiling, tables spaced far enough apart for conversations that were not anyone else's business, a long window along one wall that showed the outer dock, ships coming and going, the slow, patient geometry of space traffic. I picked a table near the wall, not next to the window, slightly back from it with a clear line to both the main entrance and the corridor that led to the docking rings. You do not unlearn that. You just stop explaining why you do it. The food I ordered was something the menu described as a grain bowl. It was grains in a bowl. Whatever grain it was warm and had been seasoned with something that was not quite right, but was not wrong either. And I was hungry, and it was food, and those two facts were enough. I laid my documentation out on the table beside the bowl. Procurement records, transit clearances, the return cargo manifest that needed to be finalized before I could book the filtration components through the freight lock. I worked through it slowly, methodically, in the way that paperwork rewards if you approach it correctly, which is to say, patiently and without hope. For about 40 minutes, the atrium was peaceful. Then the convoy docked. I heard it before I saw it. The sound a Keth military unit makes moving through a civilian corridor is distinct. It is not loud. It is the kind of organized, distributed weight of movement that registers differently from crowd noise. A frequency that the back of your neck recognizes before your ears finish processing it. I did not look up from my documentation. I was aware of them entering the atrium from the main corridor. Multiple units, high ranking, from the spacing of the footsteps and the way the ambient conversation in the room dropped and repositioned itself. The way it does when something has recalibrated the social weight of a space. I kept working. The grain bowl was mostly gone. I was reviewing the freight lock booking procedure when I became aware of someone stopping near my table. Not passing, stopping. Then the sound of additional individuals orienting themselves. A loose, semicircle forming as far as I could tell without looking up. I set down my documentation tool. The Keth lieutenant was young in the way military officers are young when they have risen faster than their judgment has caught up with them, which is a particular kind of young that crosses species without much variation. He was decorated. The decorations were real, which meant he had earned his rank in the field. That did not change what he was doing right now. What he was doing right now was performing. His subordinates were the audience. The atrium was the stage. I was the prop. He looked at my jacket. He took his time doing it. Then he looked at me. Then, for the benefit of his audience, he spoke at length. The translator handled it with the flat precision of official-grade military translation software, and what it produced was, approximately, I had heard stories that Earth sent soldiers to the Reach during the expansion conflict. I confess, I did not believe them. It seemed unlikely that a species so recently spacefaring would attempt anything so significant in a zone that experienced forces had already assessed and withdrawn from. But here is evidence that the stories may have some basis. Here is what Earth sent. He gestured at the jacket. Soldiers in costumes. One of his subordinates made a low sound that required no translation. I am curious, the lieutenant continued, and his translator gave each word its full weight. Whether Earth knows how its representatives are received beyond its own system, whether they have been told, or whether no one wanted to deliver that information in person. He tilted his head. I imagine the journey is quite long for such a small species, in such a tired jacket. He was good. I will say that. He was controlled and precise, and he had calibrated every word for exactly the effect he wanted, which was to be entertaining to his unit, while technically remaining within the boundaries of something that could be filed as diplomatic friction, rather than incident. I looked at my grain bowl. The grain bowl was empty. I had finished it at some point during the first half of his speech. The spoon was resting in the bowl at an angle, about 40 degrees. The bowl had a small chip on the rim, upper left quadrant. I picked up my documentation tool, set it down, looked at the lieutenant, said nothing. The nothing lasted about 5 seconds. Then, I picked up my documentation tool again. Something shifted in the lieutenant's posture. Not much. A fractional recalibration of what he had expected to happen here. He had expected something. Protest or silence or embarrassment. What he had gotten was a woman who said, and went back to her paperwork. And his unit was watching him and did not know what to do with that either. He opened his mouth. The atrium changed. Not loudly, not with any announcement. It changed the way a room changes when something has entered it that carries more weight than everything else in it combined. And the everything else knows it and adjusts. I felt it before I saw it. That same frequency from the corridor, but different now, slower, more deliberate. Not the distributed movement of a unit, but the particular tread of a single individual who has been in enough rooms to know that rooms arrange themselves around her. The lieutenant went still. His unit went still. I looked up. The general was not what I expected, which is something I noted and then set aside, because expectations are not useful data. She was old the way things get when they have lasted. Her uniform was dress formal, but worn with the ease of someone who has stopped thinking about it, the way you stop thinking about your own skin. Her decorations were extensive. She was not looking at the lieutenant. She was looking at my jacket, specifically at the left shoulder, the burn. She had stopped walking. She was 12 feet from my table, and she had stopped, and she was reading the jacket the way you read something you have been looking for. Her aide was behind her, holding a datapad, trying twice and then 3 times to get her attention. She was not taking it. The lieutenant had become, in the space of about 8 seconds, significantly less interested in performing for his unit. The general's eyes moved from the jacket's shoulder to the sleeve, the re-stitched sleeve, then to the empty spaces where the patches had been, then, finally, to my face. I looked back at her. She said something to the lieutenant, 1 sentence in Keth. The translator was a half step behind, and what it produced was, step back. But the lieutenant's secondary eyelids reacted before the translation finished, which told me that the original Keth had been considerably more specific than 2 words. He stepped back, and a great deal of the air went out of his performance. The general crossed to my table. She did not ask if she could sit. She stood at the edge of the table and looked at the jacket one more time, and I thought she was going to say something, and she did not yet, and the moment was very quiet. Her aide stood at a respectful distance, datapad still extended, now clearly unsure what was happening. I picked up my cold, not quite coffee, and drank the last of it. The general sat down. She did not speak immediately. She sat with the straightness of someone who does not slouch, even when they are tired. And she was tired. I could see that. The kind that lives in the way you hold your jaw, and the particular stillness of eyes that have processed more than they would like to be processing still. Her name, I would learn later, was General Verk of the Keth 3rd Command Division. She had been active for 30 years. She had been in more engagements than her official record listed, which is true of most generals worth the designation. Right now, she was looking at the burn on my jacket's shoulder. I let her look. I had had 4 years to get used to people looking at it, though usually the looking had a different quality. Usually, it was the looking of people who did not know what they were seeing. This was the looking of someone who did. She said, 3rd Expeditionary. Not a question. Yeah, I said. Her translator was a high-grade unit, the kind issued to senior command officers, and it handled the small silences between words with more grace than the standard models. When she spoke again, the English it produced was almost the right texture. She said, "The burn the reach, yes. Yeah. The signal went down in hour 3, she said. We lost contact with all Earth units in that sector. Our assessment at the time was that no extraction was possible." She paused. We withdrew our forces from the perimeter at hour 7. I looked at the empty grain bowl. The chip on the rim, upper left quadrant. Someone had used this bowl many times without it breaking all the way, which seemed like a reasonable thing to notice. We held until hour 14, I said. Signal came back at 11. Nobody came. She closed her secondary eyelids just for a moment. 6 of us came back, I said. I did not say the rest. I did not list the ones who did not. There were names in that list that I had said enough times in enough different contexts, and this was not the context for them. The room already knew. The general was quiet for a moment that had weight to it. Then she turned and looked at the lieutenant, who was standing with his unit, at a distance that suggested he understood he was in a situation he had not correctly assessed before entering it. The general said something to him in Keth. Her translator unit produced an English version, and I noticed, with mild interest, that the translator seemed to work slightly harder on this one, as if there were Keth concepts being employed that did not have clean equivalents. What it produced was this. You address this individual with mockery in a public space. You used the jacket of the third expeditionary as a subject for entertainment. I would like you to understand what you were looking at when you did that. She paused. The lieutenant's posture had changed significantly from its performance configuration. He was standing like a much younger and less confident officer. His unit had redistributed themselves slightly, which is what units do when the commanding energy in a room is no longer coming from their immediate superior. The general continued. The third expeditionary held the outer boundary of the Reach perimeter for 11 hours after all communication infrastructure failed, with no resupply, no extraction capability, no confirmation that any Allied forces were aware of their situation. They held the line because the Reach perimeter, if breached, would have opened 3 civilian population corridors to uncontrolled incursion. She did not look at me while she said this. She kept her eyes on the lieutenant. The Cath 3 command at Hour 7 assessed the perimeter as unsalvageable and withdrew our forces to secondary positions. This was the correct tactical decision given the information we had. She paused. We were wrong about the information we had. The lieutenant was not making any sounds. The signal that re-established contact at Hour 11 came from a single Earth handheld unit. It was operated by a 6-person unit that had by that point held the perimeter alone for 8 hours. Their communication read as follows. She paused, and I wondered how she had that information. Then I stopped wondering, because generals with 30 years in the field tend to know things they've spent 30 years learning. The message was, still here, perimeter intact, would appreciate pickup when convenient. One of the lieutenant's subordinates made a sound. The general said, when convenient. She let that sit in the room. A species that had been holding an undefended perimeter alone for 8 hours, with no communication, no knowledge of whether any Allied force was still operational, no certainty of extraction, sent a message that said, when convenient. Another pause. You laughed at that jacket, she said. The lieutenant was the kind of still that comes from having been very loud and then having the context of that loudness rewritten entirely in front of an audience. That jacket, the general said, has been to the Reach. The burn on its shoulder is from the incursion breach at Hour 9, when the perimeter was temporarily lost and one individual pulled it back. I am looking at the physical evidence of that on the garment in front of me, and I would ask you to also look at it and consider what you decided it was worth mocking. The atrium was very quiet. Not the quiet of a room where nothing is happening. The quiet of a room where everyone has collectively agreed to remain very still so as not to disturb whatever is currently occurring. The general said, "You will go. You will find somewhere in your current understanding of yourself the appropriate amount of smallness to feel about what you did in this room. When you have found it, you will return to me and you will explain what you found in detail, and I will decide if it is sufficient." The lieutenant said something short and low in Keth that the translator caught as, "Yes, General." He left. His unit redistributed and followed in the particular way of people trying to leave a space without appearing to flee it. The atrium exhaled. I watched the empty space where they had been. Then I looked at the general. She had turned back to the table, and her expression had settled into something else, something quieter. "I apologize," she said, "for their conduct." "Okay," I said. She looked at me. "Not a small apology," she said carefully. "A formal one, on behalf of the Keth military, for the conduct of those under my command." I looked at her. This woman who had 30 years in the field and had been at the Reach, at least at its perimeter, at least in the hours before the withdrawal, who had arrived at this atrium table 4 years late for a conversation, and was sitting across from a woman with a cold grain bowl and a worn jacket, and offering something formal. It settled into me the way formal things settle when they are real, quietly, without announcement. I said, "All right. I mean that we failed to acknowledge what happened at the Reach," she said. "We withdrew, and we filed our reports, and we documented the tactical decision, and we did not, as an institution, stop to account for what was accomplished there." "What you accomplished?" "We," I said. She waited. "6 of us," I said. "Not me, 6. "Yes," she said, "and 6. I looked at the window. A freighter was moving into the docking ring, slow and enormous and deliberate, with the patience of something that has a great deal of mass and has made peace with that. "Owen Marsh," I said. "Danny Veer, Lena Holt, Craig Bowen, Pete Stafford." I stopped. "And me." She let the names exist in the air for a moment. "The other 5, she said. "They made it back," I said. "All 6 of us made it back. We lost 8 on the way to the perimeter before the signal went down." "I know," she said. The way she said it told me she had done more than know. She had learned the names. At some point, 4 years ago or since, she had gone back and read the full records and learned the names of 8 people who had gone to the Reach and not come back. I looked at her. She looked at the jacket. After a moment, she said, "The patches. You removed them." "Yeah. Why?" I thought about how to answer that. It was not a question I had been asked before, not directly. People who knew what the patches meant did not ask. People who did not know were not asking about the patches. They were asking about the jacket, and the question was always something else underneath. "Felt right," I said. She nodded slowly. Not the nod of someone accepting an insufficient answer, the nod of someone who already knew the answer and had just wanted to hear it from the source. The aide reappeared at the general's side. The data pad was still extended. The aide's expression was the expression of someone carrying a very full container very carefully, and hopping the room would stabilize soon. The general took the data pad without looking at it, glanced at the contents, handed it back, and said something brief in Kath. The aide retreated. "How long are you on the station?" the general asked me. 3.5 hours, I said. "Departure at the next scheduled freight window." She nodded. "Then I will not take more of your time than is right." She looked at the jacket once more. "One more thing." "Sure," I said. "The unit that held the Reach perimeter," she said. "The 3rd Expeditionary. They should have been sighted, formally recognized by the Joint Allied Command. That did not happen. The political situation after the expansion conflict was complicated, and recognition was one of the things that was placed in a queue and moved back repeatedly. I said nothing. "I have made a formal recommendation," she said, 3 times in the last 4 years, that the citation be issued retroactively. Each time, it has been moved back in the queue. I looked at her. "Okay. I am telling you," she said. "Not because I believe it will happen. I do not know if it will happen. I am telling you because I want you to know it has been tried. That someone has been trying." There was something in that sentence that I filed away carefully. The way you file something you are going to take out later when you are alone and have time to look at it properly. "Well," I said, "that is something." And I meant it. The general ordered coffee. Real coffee, or as real as it gets in a station 40 light-years from the nearest coffee farm. She flagged the atrium attendant and said something brief, and the attendant nodded and came back in 4 minutes with 2 cups that steamed correctly and smelled almost exactly like the real thing. That detail cost me something, that she knew to order it, that she had done the reading or the learning or whatever it was that generals with 30 years in the field did when they decided someone was worth learning about. I picked up the cup, held it. The warmth moved through my hands in the specific way warmth does when you have been cold for a while and not admitted it. "Crail Township," the general said. I looked at her. "Your mission documentation lists a Crail Township in the Ohio Valley region as the originating authority for this procurement." "Yeah. Population approximately 6,000. Thereabouts." "They sent 1 person," she said. "They sent the right number," I said. She wrapped her hands around her cup and looked at me with the expression of someone assembling a picture from pieces, and finding that the picture is more coherent than they expected. "Tell me about crave," she said. I thought about crave. 6,000 people in a valley that had once been a manufacturing hub and then had been something else, and then had reorganized itself around what it could grow and what it could trade and what it could build with the materials available to it. The water filtration plant had been built in the early settlement years, when Earth was first consolidating its resource infrastructure in the years following the expansion conflict. It was a good system. It was old now, and good old systems eventually need new parts. "They grow a lot of grain," I said. "They make filtration membranes that they trade with 3 other townships. The water system serves the whole valley, about 11,000 people across the full network. And the system is failing," she said. "The housing joints on the primary filtration units are degrading. We have been running on replacement parts from 2 other decommissioned systems. We are out of replacement parts. So, you came here. The specific housing design is not made on Earth anymore. The manufacturer is Vel-based. Keth Station is the nearest authorized distribution point." The general looked at her coffee. "You came 40 light years to buy water filtration parts." "Yeah. And the station's customs officer called you recycled goods." "He did. And teenagers photographed your jacket." "They did. And one of my lieutenants spent a notable amount of effort making himself look important at your expense." "He did," I said. "And your response to all of that," she said, "was to continue acquiring your filtration components." "I had a list," I said. The general looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "That is the most expeditionary thing I have ever heard." I did not have an answer for that, so I drank my coffee. It was good. Not quite right, but close. Close enough that some part of me that had been running at a low-frequency tension for the last 18 hours settled fractionally. The general drank hers. The atrium continued its business around us at a respectful distance. Someone had apparently communicated to the space that the general's table was not a table you approached right now, which was the silent efficiency of well-run stations. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes. You recognize the jacket. You knew the 3rd Expeditionary. Most people do not. Most people did not do what I did after the reach," she said. "Which was?" She set her cup down with the care of someone placing something precisely. "I went back to the records when communications re-established. When the reports came in, when we understood that the perimeter had been held after our withdrawal." She paused. "I read everything. Every unit report. Every personal testimony. Every piece of documentation that was available. Why? Because I made the tactical call to withdraw at hour 7. I was the senior Keth officer on the perimeter operation. The order to pull our forces back to secondary positions was mine. The atrium was quiet at our table. "It was the correct call," she said, "with the information we had. I have had 4 years to revisit that assessment, and I have not changed it. With what we knew at hour 7, withdrawal was right." Her jaw tightened slightly. "What was not right was that we did not know the full picture, that we did not know your unit was still operational, that we withdrew and filed our reports and moved forward without going back to verify what we had left behind." I held my cup. "You did not leave us behind," I said. "The comm went down. You did not know." "No," she said. "But we should have gone back after the signal re-established, after we knew. We should have sent a formal acknowledgement, a formal relief, a formal anything. Instead, we sent a standard debriefing request through standard channels, and then there was a political transition, and then there were budget allocations, and then the reach operation was filed as a closed engagement and moved to archive." She looked at the jacket. "You were moved to archive," she said, "while you were still standing in the field." That sentence went through me at a particular angle, not painfully. It was 4 years old, and I had made a kind of peace with the shape of it, but hearing it said out loud in those exact words by someone who understood precisely what she was saying had a quality I had not been prepared for. I looked at the window. The freighter that had been docking earlier was in its berth now, settled, connected, the mechanical arms doing their slow, patient work. Lena Holt opened a bakery, I said. The general looked at me. One of the 6, I said. She came back, and she started a bakery in Cardiff. Makes bread. People drive from 2 hours away to buy it. And the others? Craig Bowen teaches emergency field medicine at a training facility in New Perth. Pete Stafford does maintenance work on Earth's outer relay stations. Danny Veer married someone from his hometown and coaches youth athletics on Saturdays. I paused. Owen Marsh runs a small engineering firm. He designs water systems, irrigation, filtration, distribution networks. He is the one who identified the specific components I needed today. Owen Marsh designed the procurement list for Creel Township, the general said. He did, and you carried it here. He could not make the trip. His youngest just started school, and there is a school event this week he did not want to miss. The general sat with that information for a moment. 6 people who held an undefended perimeter for 11 hours, she said slowly. And afterward, one makes bread, one teaches medicine, one maintains relay stations, one coaches children, one designs the water systems that supply 11,000 people, and one is carrying those design components across 40 light years. Yeah, I said. That is what you did with it, she said. I thought about how to explain that there was not a did with it. There was not a decision made after the reach that said, now I will do meaningful things to justify surviving. You just go home and you do the thing in front of you and then the thing after that, and eventually you look up and you are somewhere. There is not a lot of ceremony to it, I said. You just keep going. Yes, she said. I imagine that is exactly what it is. She finished her coffee. I finished mine. Outside, another ship was coming in, a courier class, moving with the efficiency of something that had somewhere specific to be. I want to say something formally, the general said. I waited. On behalf of the Keth 3rd Command Division, and in my capacity as the senior officer of the perimeter operation at the Reach, I formally acknowledge the conduct and sacrifice of the 3rd Expeditionary Earth Defense Corps unit at the Reach perimeter. She sat straight, eyes on me, every word exactly placed. You held the line, all of you. You held it when you had no communication, no support, and no certainty that the line meant anything anymore. You held it because the people behind it were worth holding it for. That was seen, that will be recorded. I am sorry it took this long to say so. The atrium was very still. The acknowledgement landed the way real things land, not dramatically. It settled in and took up the space it was owed and sat there. I looked at the general. She was looking back at me with the steady eyes of someone who has delivered difficult things in situations and knows the difference between when the delivery is over and when the receipt has happened. I said, the 6 of us, we do not really talk about it, the Reach. We see each other sometimes. Owen and Danny have coffee on the first Sunday of every month. I call Pete when the relay schedules bring him near Earth's inner ring, but we do not have meetings about what we did. We do not have ceremonies. No, she said. It is not that we are avoiding it, I said. It is just that we went back to the world. The world was there. It needed things. It needed water filtration components, she said. Today it did. Yeah, she smiled. It was small and brief, and had something in it that I did not have a clean word for. Not pity, not admiration exactly, something more like recognition. The specific recognition of one person who has been in the field by another. Sergeant Major, she said, using the rank I had not announced, had not worn, had not carried on any documentation on this trip. She had it from the records. She had done the reading thoroughly. Nora Voss, 3rd Expeditionary, Sergeant Major, on date of separation from active service. Retired, I said. Retired, she agreed, and buying water parts. And buying water parts. She stood, gathered herself with the economy of movement of someone who has stood from tables in difficult rooms many times, and has the physical language of it entirely sorted. Sergeant Major Voss, she said. I looked up at her. "Earth is fortunate," she said, "that it sends people like you. I thought about the 6 of us. Lena's bread, Owen's blueprints, Danny's Saturday mornings on a sports field, Craig in a training facility teaching young medics to keep their hands steady, Pete out in the relay stations with his toolkit and his patience, and me here with a bag of filtration components and a 4-hour window before departure. We are not that special," I said. "Earth has a lot of people. Most of them are doing something. The ones who are not are working on it." She looked at me for a long moment. "No," she said, "you are not special. You are exactly what you should be. That is the impressive part." I did not have an answer to that. She did not need one. "Safe travels, General," I said. "Safe travels, Sergeant Major." She walked away with that same deliberate weight that had announced her arrival. The atrium redistributed around her. Her aide fell in beside her, and the datapad, still extended, was finally accepted. He sat at the table for a while. The window showed the outer dock, ships coming and going, the machinery of a galaxy doing what it does, which is continue. I picked up my bag. The weight of it was exactly right. 4 filtration components for a water system that serves 11,000 people across a valley in Ohio. Owen's specifications, my procurement, everyone else's need. I stood, checked my departure time, 40 minutes. I thought about what the general had said, that it would be recorded, that someone had been trying these 4 years to get the recognition processed. I thought about the queue it was sitting in, and I thought about the political transitions and the budget cycles, and the long, patient crawl of institutional acknowledgement. I thought, well, that is something, and it was. It genuinely was. Not because recognition matters more than what was done, not because what was done required an audience to be real, but because she had come back to the records, and she had learned the names, and she had made the recommendations, and she had sat across from me in a station atrium and said the words precisely and meant them. That counted. Quiet things that are real count. I put on my bag. I walked to the door of the atrium. At the threshold I paused, not for long, just for the length of a breath, and looked back at the station. All of it. The promenade where 4 teenagers had grabbed a sleeve and found it attached to something they did not have the context to understand. The customs hall where a scanner had flagged the jacket as damaged goods. The table where a general had read a burn scar correctly for the first time in 4 years. 40 light-years from Creel Township. 40 light-years from 6,000 people who needed clean water. I adjusted the jacket. The left sleeve settled at the shoulder the way it always did, slightly off, the seam visible. Carol's left-handed stitching, fast and precise, and good under conditions that did not reward slowness. I had everything I came for. The docking corridor was 3 lefts in a straight run to berth 32. I knew the layout from the morning's arrival, the way I know the layout of any space I have been in, automatically, without trying. I walked it. The station moved around me. Commerce and noise and 100 species going about their business in the particular urgency of people who have places to be. No one stopped me. A few looked at the jacket, the way they had been looking at it since I arrived, but the texture of the looking had changed, or maybe my awareness of it had changed, or maybe nothing had changed at all, and it was just a jacket on a person walking to a departure gate with a bag of water filtration components and a return ticket to Earth. I found berth 32. I found my seat. I set the bag in the overhead compartment with careful attention. 4 items, properly secured, ready for transit. I sat down. The departure sequence started. The usual sounds, pressure equalization, engine warm-up, the mechanical throat clearing of a ship preparing to do the thing it was built to do. Through the small port window, I could see the station's exterior lights. Keith Station, 40 light-years out, a place I had come to get water parts and had gotten something else additionally, which happens sometimes when you went places. The ship moved. Keith Station fell away. Space, which has the quality of being both enormous and quiet simultaneously, took its usual position in the window. I thought about 6,000 people in a valley in Ohio waking up tomorrow, drinking water that would continue to run clean because of the 4 items in the overhead compartment. I thought about Owen designing those specs at his kitchen table, probably with his youngest underfoot asking questions. I thought about the school event that had kept him home, and how that event mattered, and how the filtration components mattered, and how both things were real, and both things were worth the trip required. I thought about a general sitting with records she had gone back to read, making recommendations that kept getting moved down a queue because that was the kind of thing some people did with the things they could not change. They kept trying anyway. I thought about a burn on a shoulder, about the reach at hour 9, about the particular quality of the moments when you decide something matters and hold on to it without being entirely certain why, except that the alternative is worse. I did not think about Pete or Danny or Owen or Lena or Craig for very long, because that is not something I do in transit. I save it for land, for still rooms, for mornings when there is time to let it come and go properly. The jacket was in my lap. I had taken it off for the seat the way you do, and it was folded over my knees with the shoulder facing up. The burn was there, the stitching was there, the empty spaces were there. I put my head back against the seat, closed my eyes. 6 hours to the Earth transit point. Plenty of time. Dziękuję za wysłuchanie do końca tego filmu. Naprawdę doceniam każdą chwilę, którą spędziliście tutaj ze mną. W tej chwili jesteśmy na drodze do osiągnięcia pierwszego celu. 1000 subskrybentów. Jeśli moje historie choć trochę was poruszyły, proszę wesprzyjcie mnie, klikając przycisk subskrybuj. Każda wasza subskrypcja to dla mnie ogromna motywacja, by dalej pisać i tworzyć kolejne wartościowe historie. Do zobaczenia w następnym filmie.